The 7 levels of survival movies. Explained. Level 1, the lone ordeal. A boulder the size of a small car pins a man's arm to a canyon wall, and no one on Earth knows where he is. That's the position Aron Ralston found himself in April 2003, deep inside Blue John Canyon in Utah. He'd gone canyoneering alone and hadn't told a single person his plans. For 5.5 days, he waited with almost no food or water and no way to call for help. The only way out was something most people could never bring themselves to do. He broke the bones in his own forearm using the boulder's weight, then cut through what remained with a dull multi-tool. Danny Boyle's film 127 Hours stages the escape in painful, near-continuous detail, and early screenings reportedly saw audience members faint. What's easy to miss is that the cause of the crisis and the cure are the same thing. Ralston's fierce independence is exactly why nobody came looking for him, and it's exactly what let him act instead of freezing. He rappelled down, hiked out, and was found alive. But his ordeal lasted days, in one place, against one obstacle. From here, every level removes one more thing a survivor normally depends on. Isolation is the next thing survival takes. Level 2, the isolated mind. On a deserted island, the real threat isn't hunger, it's silence. Chuck Noland, a FedEx engineer obsessed with schedules and minutes, survives a plane crash in the South Pacific and finds himself the only person on an empty island for 4 years. He has fish, coconuts, salvage cargo, even a cave for shelter. So why does he end up talking to a volleyball? After cutting his hand, he paints a bloody handprint on a ball and calls it Wilson. It becomes his only companion, proof that total isolation attacks the mind long before it starves the body. When a storm sweeps Wilson out to sea during his escape, Chuck's scream carries the same grief you'd expect for a lost friend, not a lost object. Tom Hanks lost around £50 for the role, and production paused for nearly a year so his transformation would look real. But here's what's missing. No other person, no malice, no rival actively working against him. Nature is passive, not hostile. Chuck survives years of it, only to come home and find his old life has quietly moved on without him. But silence becomes simple once another person chooses to hurt you. Level 3, the human betrayal. Surviving a bear attack should be the hardest part of anyone's story. For Hugh Glass, it wasn't even close. In 1823, the real fur trapper was mauled by a grizzly while out with a trapping expedition, and 2 companions were left behind to bury him. Instead, they took his rifle and his gear and walked away while he was still breathing. The Revenant recreates the mauling in one long, nearly wordless sequence, shot almost entirely with natural light, and the bear keeps coming back even after Glass looks finished. That's brutal, but it's survivable. What almost isn't is what happens next. Fitzgerald's betrayal strips Glass of the tools he needs to survive the cold, and that, not the animal, is what nearly kills him. Historically, Glass forgave the younger Bridger, while Fitzgerald escaped revenge after joining the army. The film invents a murdered son and a revenge plot instead, choosing vengeance over a truth that was actually more remarkable. Either way, the lesson holds. Glass crawled roughly 200 miles back to safety, proving one person can survive betrayal by 1 or 2 others. But it's still one man, one small group, one wilderness. One betrayal is personal. The Andes forces an entire group across the same line. Level 4, crossing the line. What happens when survival means breaking a rule almost no culture will ever forgive? In October 1972, a plane carrying a Uruguayan rugby team crashed high in the Andes. Of the 45 people aboard, only 16 would make it out alive, and they'd spend 72 days doing it. On about the 8th day, a small radio told them search efforts had already been called off. With no plants, no animals, nothing at that altitude, the survivors faced a choice: starve, or eat the flesh of the friends who had already died. Alive doesn't rush this decision. It shows the group arguing, resisting, before finally agreeing together. Survivor Nando Parado, who advised the film, later described it as a pact, not desperation, each person effectively offering their own body to the others. Then an avalanche killed several more of them anyway, proof that solving one crisis buys no protection from the next. 2 men eventually walked 10 days through the mountains to find help. This is no longer one person's choice. It's an entire group crossing a moral line together. They still had a functioning world waiting below. The next survivors do not. Level 5, the dead world. What do you survive for when the entire world you're saving no longer exists? In the road, a father and his young son walk toward a coast that offers no guaranteed safety through an America stripped of nearly every living plant and animal. There's no law left to break because there's no government left to enforce one. Cormac McCarthy said the idea came to him picturing a real city decades in the future while travelling with his own son. In the film, the father and boy discover people being kept in a cellar as food by another group, a clear sign of what happens once every structure of society disappears. The father keeps repeating that they're carrying the fire, good people in a world with nothing left to reward goodness. That phrase only matters because nothing external enforces it anymore. Near the end, dying, he lets go and trusts his son to strangers because the boy surviving, completely alone, would be worse. This level strips away the last thing the group in the Andes still had, an outside world to return to. What remains is one family, fighting other humans over what little is left. Even a dead world offers air, ground, and the freedom to speak. Level 6, Survival by Silence. Now imagine a threat that isn't fighting over resources, it's hunting humanity as a species, everywhere, all at once. In a quiet place, creatures with lethal hearing have wiped out most people on Earth. So one family survives by staying almost completely silent. They use sign language, sand-covered paths, and red lights instead of words. Then, Evelyn goes into labour, and the family has to keep a newborn alive in a world where a single cry could get them all killed. Here's the detail worth sitting with. Their daughter Regan is deaf, played by a genuinely deaf actress, and for most of the film, that feels like the family's greatest vulnerability. It turns out to be the opposite. Her hearing aid creates feedback that disorients the creature and exposes its vulnerable tissue. What looked like a weakness becomes a possible way to fight back. Director John Krasinski built the entire sound design around how Regan experiences hearing. Using a specialized microphone shaped like a human head, this world removes speech and ordinary family life, but they still have air, gravity, shelter, and solid ground. The final level takes even those away. Level 7, Rebirth in the Void. What's left to survive once you take away air, gravity, and the ground itself? Gravity strands Dr. Rhinestone alone in orbit after debris destroys her shuttle and the space station, with her oxygen running out and no working way home. The filmmakers used a 9-foot LED light box to synchronize Bullock's lighting with the digitally created environment. Director Alfonso Cuarón has said directly that the film is about adversity and rebirth, and he points to one exact image: Stone curled into a fetal position, a cable trailing behind her like an umbilical cord. Critics have compared this premise to Castaway, relocated into the coldest possible setting, one person against a void with nothing left to bargain with. But here, the comparison breaks down. Chuck Noland had an island. Stone has nothing at all, not even air. When her capsule finally crashes into water, she crawls onto land and has to relearn how to stand, echoing the earliest steps of life itself. That's the answer this entire progression has been building toward. Survival was never only about outlasting a threat. At its furthest edge, it means being willing to be born again.